Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. How are you? This is Kathy Barnett. Thank you to our BYOB. I am very excited to talk to you guys today about our topic. We are discussing don't fear, follow the data when it comes to understanding COVID-19, understanding what our response to COVID-19 should be. And so I'm very excited. I am very excited to be coming to you and talking to you about this tonight. I'm equally excited that we have a very accomplished subject matter expert who's going to come on and talk to us about not fearing, but following the data when it comes to COVID-19. So I want you guys, now is the time to ask your questions. I am not a subject matter expert. What I am is a very aware citizen. And when someone makes a declaration, I want to know, well, why are you saying that? Why are, and what is the evidence, right? And all of us should have that sense of curiosity. One thing that has been very interesting to me is just the lack of curiosity by a very rather sizable portion of our nation right now. No one, a large group of people, even right here in this district, seem not to be very curious to know why our political leaders are shutting down businesses or making it very difficult for someone to earn a living. Is very interesting, the lack of curiosity by many of you. And so, but for those of us who are curious, I want you to get ready to start writing submitting your questions, because I'm going to bring on our guest. Before we do, make sure you're sharing this. Hit the like button, share it, host a viewing party of your own. Let other people know what it is we're talking about and that this is the time that they need to be on the show. With that, let me bring on our guest. We have a whole lot to talk about. Dr. Frank, are you there?
Here I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can, and I can see you okay too. You're not upside down. No echo.
That's good.
All of these
Good.
things are going on in the background, guys. So, Dr. Frank, thank you so much for making yourself available.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so guys, get ready with those questions. Start putting them on their team. When you see a really good question, let us know, okay? So, guys, before I start, I was telling Dr. Frank, I pulled up his bio. It's about 4 pages long. The man is extremely accomplished. It would probably take about 20 minutes of our time for me to read through all of it. So I'm going to just pull out some sections of it. I am talking to Dr. Douglas Frank. Dr. Frank received a BA in chemistry from Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California. He qualified for his doctorate at the University of California, Santa Barbara, before transferring to the University of Cincinnati in 1986 as part of the Ohio Eminent Scholar Program. In 1990, he received a Ph.D. in surface analytical chemistry. After graduating, he formed Atom Instrument. I'm going to skip down a little bit.
Good.
He has over 50 scientific publications and is internationally regarded as an expert. Corporate consulting, research and development. Dr. Frank's scientific reputation gained him introduction to several U.S. companies where he learned to apply a scientific computer. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I would have given you a shorter one.
Okay, you have a shorter one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a family man. I've been aggressively doing science for about 40 years. I'm a teacher. I'm a scientist. I'm an inventor. That's who I am.
I love it. And most of us, I became aware of you because you have a Facebook page called Dr. Frank Models.
Yes.
Now, did you just start this group with COVID-19?
Well, it's a little bit of a story. Let me tell you, I think you'll understand, is I teach at a special school in Cincinnati called the Schilling School for Gifted Children. They're just, a friend of mine makes fun of me. He says, yeah, you teach NASA kids. These are like some of the best minds in our country, young people. It's like totally recessed for me to teach them. And I've been doing it for about 23 years now. And when I teach a class, such as like a calculus class, I don't merely teach them the stuff out of the book. We always pick something out of real life to model, to apply the math that they're learning. And normally this year, I would have modeled the election. I modeled the election every 4 years. I've made predictions about the elections. In fact, I predicted Trump in 2016. Nobody,
What?
most people, and I predicted that 13 months ahead of time too. And what I do is when I make a prediction, I put it on Facebook because, like my brother always jokes, he says, "Yeah, when you make a prediction, Doug, write it on a piece of paper, seal it in an envelope, and mail it to yourself." Well, I don't do that. I just type it on Facebook, and I've been doing that for a lot of years. So I started modeling COVID back in December because one of my students is an exchange student from China. In fact, his parents live right next door. So normally I would have been modeling the election, but because of that, I decided, okay, this year we'll do an epidemic. And I've modeled epidemics since my first epidemic I modeled was AIDS. And then I've done SARS and Ebola and many over the years with my students. So it was just a natural thing for me to start modeling that. And I always post my predictions. And then my head of school came to me in February and said, "Hey, Doug, we're supposed to take a bunch of kids to Europe in April. What's COVID going to be doing in April?" So I went and did the calculations, and it worked out that I told her, about April 1st, you're going to be peaking in Europe, so you don't want to be going there. And so we canceled that trip. But I started doing the calculations throughout Europe. And then she said, "Hey, our governor is talking about shutting down our schools. What's going to happen there?" And I said, "Well, Ohio's going to probably peak in about the middle of April. So there's a good chance we could finish up and get back to school, but it's going to be close." So you can see it just naturally led to where I started posting all my predictions online. Before I knew it, I was doing 50 states and 30 countries.
Wow. So, guys, you see why we have Dr. Frank on with us today. I mean, because quite frankly, Dr. Frank, I believe, like so many other Americans, that COVID-19 is a very serious virus.
Absolutely.
And it has shown itself to be specifically serious when we're dealing with a particular segment of our population, specifically
Absolutely.
those with a compromised immune system. However, what we are experiencing, and I find it to be very unfortunate, because for those of us who truly believe this is a serious virus, we need to take it serious. We're also being, in between a rock and a hard place, because we also recognize that this virus is being politicized. And when we feel as though it's being politicized, that people are not following the data, instead they're politicizing it because it's election. And Joe Biden in and of himself cannot draw a gnat to the polls. And so they're having to drum up a Me Too moment. and COVID is, for many of us, believe that COVID is the primarily Democrats Party Me Too moment of and as a result, we feel as though, although this virus is very serious, and specifically towards those with a compromised immune system, I find myself rebelling and rejecting the mandates to wear a mask, to bunker down, to quarantine, can't go anywhere. And it's just a very uncomfortable situation that we find ourselves in right now.
Absolutely. One of the things that I did is, I have a family and I want to know if I'm safe, or my children's safe, or is my school safe, is I blocked myself out from all the media. I'm a scientist, so I did an experiment on myself. Starting in February, I haven't watched any news since. One or two things now and then that I had to watch, but otherwise I've blocked myself out. And I was kind of hoping that as a country, we would come together and deal with this, because this is a serious thing and a lot of people are going to die. It's kind of like 9/11 happened, and we as a country came together and, mourned together and faced the problem. So I didn't even realize how political it become, really dramatically political. And, since I was monitoring all the websites and monitoring the data, I could see changes happening in the state websites, and I was confused by it for a while. But then it became obvious that states that wanted to open up became really transparent with the data on their websites. And states that didn't want to open up, they became more opaque. They started not being as transparent with the data. And you could see, when you go to a web page, the very first thing, big bold numbers, thousands of cases, blah, scary, scary, scary. You could see it was based upon fear. Whereas the state websites that were trying to, here are the data, here's where we stand, this is what we expect. The calmer websites, you could tell those were the states that wanted to open up. So I was surprised by that at first. I didn't expect that. So that's been kind of another aspect of the Dr. Frank Models page that I didn't anticipate. I've run into a lot of people that are really afraid, much more afraid than I would have ever thought. So
Yeah, listen, we have a question. Todd Ellis. Todd Ellis is actually the one who introduced me to you. So I am very new to your page, and you're so
Sure.
kind. If you go to Dr. Frank Models
Yes.
public Facebook page, you're
Sure.
very kind to the newbies because you recognize there's so much information. You've been following this and explaining it since December. Someone like myself come on, ask a question that you've already addressed ad nauseum back in March. But you're very kind. I'm finding people are very kind. So guys, go to the page and start diving in inch by inch, piece by piece. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right?
Good answer.
And so that's what we're doing. But let's just jump in. Sure. Todd Ellis asked a really good question, and that is, let's just start. What have you found about the Pennsylvania health data set?
Okay. Do you want me to tell you what about the website first, or do you want me to tell you about the data first?
The data first. Okay. So what is the truth? And Dr. Frank, I'm going to be taking notes. I got pen and paper. Guys, take notes. Let's go.
Good. That's a good student. I always encourage my students to take notes. You guys who are managing this, if you'll put my slide up, I've brought the data for Pennsylvania up on my other. Let's see if they'll bring that up. Yeah, good. Did. There it is. So this is what I typically will show on the Dr. Frank models. And I've done this at least once, but probably a dozen times for every state. And you notice that up in the upper left, I put a timestamp. So all of my predictions have a timestamp. All of my models have a timestamp. So if you look at some of my early models, you can find my mistakes where I predicted incorrectly and had to kind of learn as I went. But that's the scientific method. But anyway, so if we look at this graph, you notice that on the left side, that's the number of deaths on the left axis, up and down. That's the number of deaths per day. So it goes from 0 to 300 deaths per day. Okay, and then across the bottom, you have date. That's the week. And so you notice the oldest is back in March, and the newest is over here just this weekend. I just updated this data set for you, I think the night before last, because I knew I was going to be here. So then what you do is you can look, this nice red dotted curve, that's a nice one to start with because it stands out really nicely. That's the number of cases that have been assigned to each day by the state for how many COVID cases you had that day. So you notice, for example, here on April 4th, you were about 100 cases that day, and then it went up a little bit. But you notice that ever since then, it was declining. For months and months and months, the number of cases per day were declining till about the middle of June. And then it just started gently climbing back up again. Now, that's not me making anything up. That's me downloading the data right off of the Pennsylvania website and graphing it and just showing you what that is. Now, the black dots, you can see the black dots, they kind of wiggle around a lot. Those are the number of deaths per day. And you notice that they really picked up and peaked around the middle, early May there, see it there? And then it's been declining ever since. It's never gone back up. There are these little week-to-week wiggles, but it's just been declining. So I would say that the epidemic in your state is fading. And that shape, that distinct shape where the big hump followed by the gradual decline, that's very common. All the states seem to show that, who have already had their epidemic and it's fading away. So that's a very good sign. People, one more thing about this graph. The heavy red line here, this wiggly heavy, that's the model that I predicted months ago about what this would do. And I call it an optimistic projection because I assume that it's going to go through its peak and finish right up.
And it seems to be right on target. The correlation seems really good.
It is really good. I agree. And that's not an accident. It's because as you said, I'm following the data. I'm not a lot of scientists will take a theoretical approach, where they'll come into it ahead of time and say, well, we are going to assume this property, we're going to assume that property, and then let's make a projection. And that's the problem. You can have anything from very few cases up to millions of cases when you make that kind of assumption. But I wanted to know where we really stood, so I used the data to guide my initial assumptions. So of course, if I'm using the data to guide what's going to happen, I'm going to be much closer. And you can see that. But this is an optimistic projection. I assumed it would decay as quickly as it grew. And and I tell everybody about that on the page. I have the ability in my models to make it fit, but sometimes it's better to have a simple model and then you can compare to it. So, because the purpose of this isn't for me to show how smart I am or be right or wrong. The purpose of this is know where you stand. And I can tell you guys in Pennsylvania, you're in really good shape right now. You are fading away nice and steady. Another month you would be down you'd probably be done with it completely. The thing that you'll hear people talk about are these cases going up. And they'll say, well, yeah, but the cases are increasing. The cases are increasing. Yeah, but there's a reason that the cases are increasing. And it's not necessarily because the number of COVID cases are increasing. It's because of this one here. This is right off your state website. And you notice here the number of cases, and you notice it peaked just like I showed in the other graph. It came down, and then it suddenly started going up again. Well, if you look at the number of tests you're doing, guess what? You're increasing the tests every day. So what I like to help people understand is, let's say you do a pregnancy test. You think you might be pregnant. So you go to the grocery store and you buy your pregnancy test, and you do your test, and it comes back positive. Do you believe it? Well, probably it's right. So, but you call your doctor next. You confirm. That's the kind of test that is being used right now for COVID. It's called a diagnostic test. It's really not supposed to give you the final word on things. It's supposed to say, yep, this person probably has it, so now go do another test. It's super sensitive. It's kind of oversensitive, actually, because just like in the pregnancy test, you wouldn't want it to miss a pregnancy because, you might drink alcohol or take drugs or something if you thought you weren't pregnant. But if you know you're pregnant, you'll take extra good care of yourself. So pregnancy tests are kind of oversensitive because of that. They can even detect pregnancies when you use them with men sometimes because they're really sensitive to some of the hormones that are in there. But the point is, if we just started randomly testing the population with pregnancy tests, we'd start getting a lot of false positives. And that's what this is. When you do more and more and more and more testing with a test that's not designed for giving you a perfect result, a test that's designed to give you a good idea, then you just naturally get more cases. And the way we know that is...
So Dr. Frank,
yeah.
So let's pause for a moment because
Yeah,
you've given us so much good information. Let me just write this down.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit because according to this first chart, what you showed us is that Pennsylvania is in a really good spot as far as it relates to COVID-19 or the aggressive nature, the danger, the deaths, right? So, so let me ask you this. When we're looking at this, at these numbers, because we see the red that is trending up, as you just explained, that's because of cases. And the cases have increased because of the number of tests we're now taking. I think I saw on your chart, did you say 20,000 tests a day?
It depends on the state, and I don't know the exact number, but I could make a prediction. You notice how the level, it's pretty level. It's around 50. If you divided, now see, here's me making a prediction. If I took this number 50 and divided it by 6.8%. What I've done is I've scaled down the cases because otherwise you couldn't see it on the same scale.
Right.
So if you divided it by 6.8% and then divide it by 5%, if we did that number, I bet you're going to find that's the number of tests you're doing per day in Pennsylvania.
How many? How many? 20,000?
Well, let's just do the calculation here together. I'll bring it up so everybody can see. So, there's no funny business here. So if I take 50, because that line was about 50, and then I divide it by 6%, 0.068, and then I divide that by 5%, my prediction would be that you got, oops, I can't divide by 0.
Yeah, you forgot the 5.
0.05. So, okay, let me clear that again. Sorry. I'm a math teacher, so I should be able to do this, huh? So 50, I'll just 50 divided by 0.068 divided by 0.05. There you go. So my guess is you're up in the up above 10,000 tests a day.
About 15,000 tests a day. Okay, so if you move the calculator, so according to
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
the red squiggly line is
Yeah.
up because of the number of cases are up because we're testing
Yeah.
roughly about 15,000 people a day in Pennsylvania. So let me
That would
ask
be
my
my
first
guess.
question.
Yeah.
Should we be looking at the number of cases to make policies or the number of deaths to make policies, and why?
Well, one of the lessons I've learned by modeling all the other countries is that cases are really unreliable for a lot of reasons. For example, we just did a calculation when I made a prediction, which could easily be wrong, but I made a prediction. What if we wanted fewer cases tomorrow? All we'd have to do is test half as much. So, in other words, it depends on more than one thing. Cases are unreliable for that reason.
And so let
Deaths,
me
on the
just
other
say,
hand,
and so let me
yeah,
just say, and so if
yeah,
you are trying to politicize something, then
yeah,
you really want to push the number of cases
right,
that, or the number of tests that are being
yeah,
given. If
yeah,
you do not want to politicize something, you will probably decrease the number of cases you want
yes,
to, or the number of tests you want to
yes.
administer. So, what is the best number that we should be making policies off of? If we want to be on the up and up, we do not want to, to
Yeah,
harm businesses and livelihoods
yeah.
and the health of individuals unnecessarily. What number should we, the American people, be demanding that our policymakers use? The number of cases or the number of deaths?
The number of deaths,
Why?
because you can't fool Mother Nature. If you can change the cases tomorrow. If I wanted to make the situation look bad in Pennsylvania tomorrow, all I'd have to do is double the number of tests we did in Pennsylvania. But it's really hard to double the number of deaths. It's if a person's alive or dead. So that's the nice thing about the deaths curve is that it's less vulnerable to political manipulation. So
Now
it's
to your
go ahead.
now to your point,
Yeah,
in the at the apex of the virus here in Pennsylvania,
yeah.
there were some doubling of deaths, and
Oh yeah,
coroners all throughout the state came
yeah.
out and pushed back against that number, which
Yep.
then forced the health secretary and the governor to take those false
Mm-hmm.
deaths out of the calculation. So to your point, if I want to
Yeah.
be on the up and as American people, remember guys, I tell you all the time, this is not about partisan politics for me. This
We
is
agree.
not about Democrats or Republicans. This is about my country. This is
Preach
about
it, sis.
making sure that we're doing the best thing for the nation. And so
Yes.
get partisan politics out of your mind for a moment. We should be looking at the number of deaths because that
Yes.
number is less likely to be manipulated, right, Dr. Frank?
Yes. It can be manipulated, as you pointed out. In fact, earlier on there was this really big wiggle where they added a bunch of deaths and then had to take them back out. So yes, it is vulnerable, but it's the least vulnerable.
It's
So
the least,
it's
but well, nothing is
yeah.
perfect, right?
Right.
But it is
Right.
the least vulnerable. Okay, so
Yeah.
now going back again. So now
Yeah.
that so we're looking at the black line. The black
Yep.
line are the number
Yep.
of deaths. The red
Yep.
line is the number of cases.
Cases.
And the number
Yes.
of cases are high because we're testing more
Yes.
people today. According to Dr. Frank, a very accomplished man,
Yes.
who predicted Donald Trump would win, who was probably the only one. That alone gives you more credibility than every poll that's out there, right? So let's
Yeah.
just look at that alone, okay? The fact that he predicted Donald Trump would win and everyone else said that wasn't going to happen. So if we're,
Everybody said I was insane.
guys, go back, team, go back to the number to the screen that we're looking at.
Yeah.
So if
This
we're
one
looking
right
at
here.
so if we're looking at that, thank you. So if we're looking at that, so we have it down, and in Pennsylvania, according to you, if we're looking at the number of deaths, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, one death is one death too many. But if we're looking
Agreed.
at the number of deaths to understand where we are as a state
Yeah.
and how our policy should be reflected, we should be opened up in this state. But instead, take the question down, please. But instead, what we're experiencing is our governor and health secretary, Dr. Levin, has just came back out and increased the stringent requirements, draconian requirements that they've just placed again on businesses, limiting the number of people who can occupy the occupancy of restaurants, for example. So you can't have more than 25 people, and very few restaurants can actually survive on that kind of model. They even went so far because according to our governor and health secretary, we're experiencing a spike, a second wave. Is really draconian. We may not open schools. Everyone got to just kneel in place. They put now it's mandatory. You must wear a mask or else you're violating a law. They've even created a snitch line for people to call
Wow.
and
Wow.
report their neighbors who are not wearing a mask if you're outside your home. If you step outside your home, you're supposed to wear a mask. So they're putting all of these draconian measures on us because they're trying to save us and tell us this virus has spiked. The second wave is here. People are going to die. This is horrible. Now, but you're telling us something completely different. You're saying everything is showing us that we should be able to open up our state much more so. No one is saying go back to normal, but we should not be increasing stringent requirements. We should be lessening them. Am I right?
I think that's the right way to look at it. If it was a real if this was a real surge, a real spike, then when these cases started going up 6 weeks ago, the deaths would have started going up, but they haven't. So it's simply a testing artifact. There's some other reason they want to keep us closed down, and it's not really related to the true epidemic. If you think about it for a minute, you realize that what you know, you can look at this state after state, country after country. COVID comes in and it ravages a community. It picks the vulnerable people out and it kills them. And that's a very sad thing. But you notice once it finishes that, it fades away. And that pattern repeats over and over again. So there's also another problem with staying shut down. If you stay shut down, you're sort of putting off the inevitable. Now, I'm not saying that we should throw all of our people out there to get them killed. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that after a while, the people who can get it and not get too sick and die from it will get it. And some people call that herd immunity. I don't really like that term very well. But keep in mind, if you completely shut everything down, you have zero herd immunity, and all of your vulnerable vectors, all of the ways that the epidemic can spread, are available. You'd like to plug up some of those. You know, I like describing it like an island with a bunch of bridges to it. If you burn down all the bridges, the people on the island are safe. But so it doesn't help to protect the bridges. You want the virus to have its way with the younger population, and then they can carry it later. So there's also that argument. So, you know, there's sort of a scientific argument and then there's a political argument. The scientific argument is you guys your epidemic is fading, and I think that the cases are going up because you're doing more testing, not because your epidemic is increasing. And then the other thing would be, the other scientific argument would be that COVID has already kind of had its way in your area. It's already, you know, it seems cruel to say it, but it's like it's already picked the low-hanging fruit. It's already grabbed the people that are vulnerable, and now it's fading away. So now you really kind of want the younger people, to get out and interact with each other. It's safer. So, you know, now that's sort of the scientific thing. Then you have the political decisions that you make after that. That's a completely different era. And Dr. Frank often says, science and politics don't play well together. So it's a different,
You know,
different question.
it's very upsetting for me. The people who have been following me for some time, you know, my story, and I feel as though I crawled from up under a rock. A little black girl who grew up on a pig farm in southern Alabama. I grew up below the bottom rung of the economic ladder, and I worked very hard to be able to create a life for myself, to be able, the discipline that goes into that, the sacrifices that go into that. And although so many of you did not grow up on a pig farm, but
I did.
you had to sacrifice. You sacrificed a lot to get to where to have that business, to have the life that you have. And I take it very personal when I see people like our governor, for example, and others who are instituting these very draconian or authoritarian policies, not because they're following the data, not because they're following science, as Democrats love to tell conservatives how they're following the science. They love science until they don't, and they want something else. And people are losing their livelihoods. That
Yes.
is what this comes down to. If there is a reason at the very beginning of all of this, in mid-March, when our government came and asked us to do the patriotic thing and to stay home, to put a pause on our lives and our country, overwhelmingly Americans answered that call
Yes, they did.
because we were trusting and we're trying to follow the data. We recognize this is very serious. We need to do
Yes.
our part to mitigate. But today, all these months later, there is something more to this. Governor Wolf and Dr. Levin are not following the data. My opponent is not following the data. They are politicizing a situation that is having a real impact on people. And I find that to be, it's so hurtful to me. I take it very personal. It should not be done.
I like you on the stump.
Well,
I grew up on an Angus ranch, so I know what you're talking about, working hard.
yes, right? You have to sacrifice some stuff.
Yes.
And with the wiggle of a pen,
Yeah.
executive order after executive order is coming out. That is being a death knell to so many
Yes.
people's livelihood. I'm watching people get shouted out of stores as they try to explain to the mob that they cannot wear a mask because of their
Yeah.
health issues, but the mob is shouting them out because mobs are stupid. You don't have to be smart to be a part
Right.
of a mob. I'm
Mob.
watching
Right.
people get dragged. I watched someone get dragged out of a store
Wow.
because they refuse to put a mask on. I'm
Wow.
watching grown men cry because they're losing everything and they feel
Yes.
helpless. This is having real world consequences.
Absolutely. And what we've been learning, for example, in Ohio, we have a local trustee who the governor had declared our area to be a hotspot, and there were going to be all these, as you put it, draconian measures. And so she called me up and said, Dr. Frank, help me out. Help me understand the data. We went over the data together. We were clearly not a hotspot. She pushed back on the trustees for the county, and they pushed back on the state. And the very next day, the state government withdrew the designation. So I think that your kind of pushing back can work, but you're not going to be able to start from the top down. You have to start from the bottom up. You have to find the local people whose lives are at stake, whose careers are at stake, whose businesses are at stake,
And we
and
have to
find
just
those.
start saying no.
Yes, exactly, and from the bottom up,
No.
and then it works, and then it works.
Listen, if this virus was taking people out the way we thought it was back in
Right.
early March, I would be the first one to say, shut it down. We did. We stayed home because we wanted to do our
Of course.
part. But today, the facts, Democrats, pay attention. Democrats, listen. The facts are not on the side of our governor and PA Health Secretary Dr. Levin. The science is not backing them up. This thing is becoming political. So now let's continue to move on, because another question we hear a lot about are these false positives. What are we talking about with false positives?
Well, no test is perfect, and like I mentioned before, there are different tests for different purposes. So, for example, if you're in the emergency room and you're a nurse and you need to know right now, within a minute, does this person have COVID, so that you can put them in the COVID ward or you can put them in the non-COVID ward because it's an emergency, there's a quick test you can do. The problem with that quick test is it generates about 30% false results. It could give you a false positive, it can give you a false negative, because it's so fast. The super accurate tests take weeks to get information on. So when we're doing widespread testing, there are two things going on. First, you can't afford to do the super expensive, super accurate test for everybody. It's just not feasible. That's kind of what got us in trouble back in February, is the CDC was advising us all to use that super accurate test, but we can't get the results for 2 to 3 weeks, and we didn't have enough of them. They're too hard to do. So an easier test came out late in May that all the states started using. It's an easier test, it's a faster test, but it's not a super accurate test. It's a diagnostic test. It tells you pretty good, say 95% accuracy, that it's whether a person has COVID or not. The problem is if you do 1,000 tests and there's 5% error, you're going to get 50 false positives, even though they aren't really there. So that's the problem, and that's why that curve continues to rise there, because you're doing more and more testing every day. So of course you're going to get more and more false positives. Kind of like I joked about the pregnancy test. If you test a bunch of people, the more people you test, the more people you're going to find that are pregnant, even though they're not. You're going to get false positives. So that's part of the problem. You would know they were real if the deaths also started coming back up, but they're not. They're continuing to fade. And I could show you examples of other places, like Las Vegas is a good example, where their cases suddenly started shooting up. And we weren't sure at first whether it was real or not, but then sure enough, the deaths followed a week later. So you could see, yep, this is a true new infection. And we had the same along our southern border. You know, the epidemics go in waves. So we had a big wave in China, and then a big wave in Europe, and now in America, and now it's in Mexico. And it's behind, right? So, and we have a lot of American citizens in Mexico that are saying we don't want to be in the middle of this, so they're coming to America. But unfortunately, they're bringing the epidemic with them. So we have some new infections to deal with too. But it doesn't look like you guys have a new one. It's the southern states like Texas and Florida and New Mexico and Southern California where that is. So that's how you know. If the cases go up and the deaths follow, you know they're real. But if the cases go up and the deaths continue to fade, forget about it. You know your guys are doing great.
Yeah, things are getting crazy when liberal media outlets like CBS 21 starts demanding to see the evidence from the governor.
Oh, wow. Yes.
I know. I posted it on my Facebook page. CBS is demanding our governor to provide the data. And with a snarky smirk on his face, he says, yes, I have the data, but I'm not going to show it to you. And I was thinking
that's amazing to me. There are other states that show 10 times as much as your website does, and they don't have any qualms about it. And they show you, I can download beautiful data sets and show you by day and by county and by age, every person that died in that state. They're just beautiful, detailed information. But your state doesn't want you to have that information. They're deliberately keeping you in the dark.
And I was thinking to myself, is there a reason? Is there some high sensitivity or security that HIPAA laws is the reason why? I'm sitting back thinking as I saw his little snarky smirk on, yes, I have that data, but no, I'm not going to show it to you. And I posted it. It's out there on our Facebook page at Kathy Barnett for Congress, PA4 on Facebook. You can look at it, and it's very arrogant. And I'm thinking to myself, trying to think the better of people. Is there a legitimate reason why they would not want to show the data that gives them the mandate to place these draconian, these death knell policies on businesses?
I think there is a good answer to that. And that's that early on, there were several epidemiologists on my page, and they were talking to me about this exact subject. And they were saying, and you, by the way, it's not just me saying it. You can go to the CDC website and see that these are the instructions too. In general, social scientists have done experiments on past epidemics. And they know that they need a certain amount of compliance from the government, from the people. And they've learned that if they generate fear, that people will comply. But if they don't generate fear, they won't get enough compliance. So deliberately, a lot of states want to generate fear and to control the people. They want to scare you into wearing masks and scare you into staying inside because they think that by doing so, the epidemic will end sooner. And so that's a legitimate reason. You know, if you're trying to save lives, I can understand why you might want, it might, it's like I always tell the story about my children. If my children are playing in the street, I run out and grab them by the arm and I'll scold them and maybe send them to their room. And if they're teenagers, then I might say, hey, stop playing in the street. You'll get injured and I don't want to clean up the mess. And, but if they're an adult, you'll say, you'll explain the risks and you'll say, here's the problems. Now, the problem is that, take my little kid example again. If I took him into the room and then every day ran into the room and showed him movies of buses running over little children on the street, I'm going to terrify those children. I'm going to traumatize those children. And that's kind of the mode we're in. It seems like the mode that the governors are just announcing daily, all these massive deaths and, trucks running over children kind of approach. So, but we're not just justified for that anymore. You can see the data. We're way beyond that. Maybe that was justified back at the peak, maybe back in May, but it's time to let up. We're not in that mode anymore.
Okay, I have some competing thoughts. One of them is, it's competing. If we listen to some politicians, it seems like this virus is very selective about who it infects. In fact, this virus is downright picky.
Brilliant.
Are some places more vulnerable to the spread of the virus than others?
Oh, yeah. Rest homes are particularly vulnerable.
Which one?
Rest homes or congregate living, like prisons or anywhere where you like the subways in New York. Any place where you have people compressed, right in each other's faces, constantly interacting up close, that's not a good situation.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Because I was thinking, are you more susceptible to getting the virus if you attend church versus going to the grocery store?
I think both of them are probably pretty safe. I would guess that a church is probably more dangerous because I know when I go to church, I hug and kiss all the old ladies. Church could be more dangerous because I don't hug the people at the grocery store.
Because you're not hugging. So if you don't hug and kiss, probably cool. Okay, what about this? Protesting versus going to work. Is it safer to go out and protest in mass numbers than it is to go to work? Because we can protest here in Pennsylvania, but we can't go to work.
Well, protesting is pretty safe because you're outside. That is a big improvement already. When you're inside, you're kind of in a confined space with other people, and you all touch the same surfaces and whatnot. So it is kind of dangerous, but if you use good hygiene, inside, you're probably okay. I think both of them are actually really safe. I think these are variables for sure, but they're all minor variables. The major variables, the things that really control whether or not you catch it and whether you spread it, are 10 times or 50 times more important than those variables. For example, now that it's already happened in Europe and the studies are starting to come out, they're showing that almost none of the virus spread through the schools. So why? Well, because the kids are young and they're healthy, so they don't catch it and they don't spread it. It's in communities that are like in homes where there were multi-generational living together, where the old grandma might catch it from somebody who's middle-aged who is working. Those are the vectors that really matter. Or in New York, you could use that example. I mean, what a perfect vector is that? You have people standing face-to-face on the subway, 20 or 30 minutes every day, twice a day. That's a perfect way to spread it quickly. So it's less about the grocery store, or it's less about the church, or it's less about that. It's more about what the behavior is in those places. So, if you were going to say which is safer, the church or the protest, they're probably equally safe, and they're probably, not that dangerous. I mean, unless everybody's kissing at church.
Well,
which I
I mean,
would be doing.
it, again, again, this virus is very serious. We need to take it seriously. But when you
Absolutely.
see that abortion centers are allowed to remain open, but I can't go to work, it makes you think twice about what's going
Yeah.
on with this, with those who are making the policies.
Yeah, I don't, I'm not happy. To me, when I look at the decisions that are being made, they don't seem consistent with the data. Definitely in Pennsylvania, you guys are on the decline. You should be loosening up, not tightening them up, because
Yeah.
and
A- a-
you've already picked your low hanging fruit. It's time to move on.
Another question, because I'm
Yeah,
just always curious. And guys, get ready to, you can put up some more questions right now. This is going to be my last question. Then we go to the audience. They're buzzing over here.
good.
Um, Let me ask, homeless. I would think if it's all about sanitation and all about, just staying hunkered down and all of that, then this virus, or just health and your ability to be healthy and eat well and all of that, that this virus would have just wiped out our homeless population. But that's not the case.
Yeah, I was especially expecting that in California. They have something like 130,000 homeless people, and I was ready for a mass horrible infection. And if somebody had asked me to make a prediction, I would have predicted that incorrectly because I would have expected, just like you said, I would expect that community particularly vulnerable. But for example, I know that the leaders in San Francisco, they set up tent communities and got everybody when they saw it coming. So it's less about whether you're homeless or not as much as your behavior. If you cram people together, they're going to spread it. If you let them spread out, keep them good and separate. And so that would be a good, there would be an example where the homeless didn't matter. On the other hand, I have a really good friend on my Dr. Frank Models page who is a respiratory therapist. She's the lady who works with people right when they're near the end of their life, trying to rescue them, last ditch efforts by putting tubes down their throat. They call that a vent. And
Yeah.
she said that she worked in Boston for 8 weeks. Can't even imagine, every day, all those people working with people like that, watching them die every day. She's a real hero, in my opinion. But anyway, she said that the homeless people that came in, they were particularly bad, and that brings up the issue about, it's called viral load. If you and I were to meet each other right now and we were giving each other a polite hug, it's very unlikely that I would be spreading. It's not like touching you is going to make you infected. But if I'm breathing in your face, yes, I'm giving you a lot of virus. That's a large viral load. If I'm even sick, then so in the homeless community, they don't really have the ability to get away from each other, right? They're crammed up in a cardboard house together, or they're uptight and up close, trying to keep warm around a fire. So they have got all the wrong situations to really spread it. So it's hard to generalize, but it's really more about behavior than it is anything else.
Okay, here's one from Joan. She says, if Japan and South Korea were able to control the infection with mask and hand washing, why can't U.S. be successful with this as well?
Yeah, didn't model Japan, but I did model South Korea. And South Korea did a fabulous job until right at the end. They had a couple of rest homes get infected. And so it took off again because once it got started, it spread. You need to think of it like a forest fire. If 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 somebody is driving down the road and they throw out a cigarette out the window, and there's a lot of dry grass along the side of the road, that could start into a fire, and a whole forest could catch on fire. But once that grass right near the road is gone, then there might be a little small fire, but not a big one. So things picked up again in North Korea pretty bad. It wasn't necessarily a perfect success. So also there's something else going on. They're very close to China, and they're used to these flus coming out every year.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trained as a populace. As soon as they come into the season, it's like the masks appear. It's a regular thing. And one of the things you'll notice in America is that, I know I don't have 50 masks in a box by my front door. What we really should be doing is using a mask and throwing it away every day, or using special masks that we can wash every day. But we don't use them properly. So actually, our masks are probably more dangerous than not wearing the masks because they're like germ collectors. Somebody's sick and they keep using the same mask. Imagine how filthy that mask is even after an hour. And then they touch it and adjust it. Man, that's like concentrating it on their hands. So I think comparing us to South Korea isn't apples with apples because they're used to doing it. They're used to the hygiene. We're not. So I'm not sure we would be very good at it our first year wearing masks. Anyway, that's just one aspect of it.
But do you have you done any research to see the effectiveness of masks?
Not myself personally, but there have been several studies, and there's a principle in science, famous chemist named Irving Langmuir termed it pathological science. Any science that's really marginal, that's right on the edge, that could tip one way or the other, it ends up being decided pathologically what the answer is. Because people who want it to come out one way bias the data one way, and people want it to come out the other way bias it the other way. And I think masks is one of those questions. It's right on the edge. It only works if you do it right and in the right ways. And otherwise, it doesn't work. It's right on the edge. So those are the studies that I've seen.
Now you have a another analogy. I've heard a couple of analogies now. The pregnancy test. I heard you talk about a wildfire, and you have another one that I see often on your Facebook page.
Yeah.
Dr. Frank Motto, drive safely. What do you mean by that?
Well, I don't want anybody to take COVID lightly. I don't want you to just say, oh, this isn't real, this is all a hoax. And then you go out there and you get sick and you make somebody sick and they die. Nobody, I don't want that to happen. So I want you to be smart about it. But I did, for example, recently the governor in our state said that one of our counties was a hotspot. So I did the calculations and I figured out it was 5 times less risky to be in that county doing normal things than it was to drive your car. You are more likely to die in a car accident than you were to get sick and die of COVID. So are you going to get in the car and drive somewhere today? Yes. Well, should you be careless about it? No, you should drive carefully. Same with COVID. The risk is way low that you'll get sick and die from it. So that doesn't mean you should be careless. You should still drive carefully. Use good hygiene. Wash your hands. Take care of your health. Pray every day. Take good care of yourself.
And don't be all up in people's faces in crap situations.
Exactly.
Breathing on one another. But I think we're very mindful of that. I know that I am, right? If I see a crowd, I just kind of take a couple of steps back.
Yes.
Or if I want to put my mask back on, because people, as I take 2 steps back, they take 1 step forward. It's like we're so used to being in each other's space.
Yes. And that's good. I always tell people, hug and kiss and snuggle all you can, because the rest of the time you can't. Right now, we have to be a little safe right now. We have to drive carefully.
And now, have you done any modeling about a second wave? Everyone is talking about a second wave. Clearly, Pennsylvania, based on your modeling, is not in the middle of a second wave, which is the reason, which is what we're being told. And that's the reason why we're bringing back all of these authoritarian policies. But have you done any modeling about a second wave eventually?
Yes, I've done a lot of modeling on that. And I think it's important to distinguish between a second wave and a second infection. So, for example, you go through your wave here in Pennsylvania, it's going to be over with, beautiful. Well, what if a whole new group of people come in that have it? They could start a second infection. It's not the same starting infection, in other words. And we have that problem right now in America because, like I mentioned earlier, Mexico is just getting over its peak right now. And all those American citizens that are down there are coming back to America for safety. And we have all those legal green card holders that come up here and do so much work for us. It's valuable work. We need those people, but they're bringing their infection with us. So that I wouldn't call that a second wave. I would call that Mexico's wave transplanted here. So you kind of have to distinguish between a second wave and a second infection.
So now, border security is going to be important again, and another important conversation.
Yeah, I think so. But keep in mind, these are American citizens and green card holders. These are legal, right? But it might make sense to quarantine them, right? If we're trying to protect ourselves. But now think about the flu for a minute. What typically happens is a flu will start. and then it'll last a few years and gradually fade out. Well, the COVID will probably come back again in the winter next flu season. So, it will be probably, though, and by my modeling, less severe. And here's why. If you imagine that forest fire just came through the forest and burned everything up, it burned up all the tinder, all the dry wood, all the easy to burn wood's all gone. Now try to start a fire there again next year. It's really tough. It's all the easy to burn wood's already been gone. So that's why the second infection or the second waves are smaller than the first ones.
So let me ask you this. Would you have mandated, given what we know about, this virus is serious and it is particularly serious towards those with the compromised immune system, would you have mandated that COVID-19 positive patients be placed in nursing home facilities and long-term care facilities for safekeeping?
That would have been exactly the opposite to what I would have done.
For most thinking people, I don't know if you know this or not, but our PA Health Secretary, Dr. Levin, and Governor Wolf, but specifically Dr. Levin, mandated at the height of all of this that positive COVID-19 patients be placed in nursing home facilities and long-term care facilities. And as a result, 93% of the deaths in my county, Montgomery County, of 93% of COVID-19 related deaths in my county took place in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. 68% for the state.
There's really no excuse for that too, because even back in January and February when I was modeling the China data, it was obvious that the people that were the most vulnerable were the older folks. I mean, it's very obvious in the data. There's no excuse. You know right from the outset that those are the people that are vulnerable. We have to protect them. Or, it's not just old people too. It could be anybody with a medical condition, compromised immune systems. But rest homes are just absolutely full of vulnerable people. And if you think about the nurses, they don't have one nurse per room. That nurse has to go in and care for a patient. And then what is she going to do? Completely shower and strip and put on new clothes and then go to the next room? I mean, it's like a perfect environment to really spread it horribly among people that are particularly vulnerable. So no, it's exactly opposite to what the science was already saying back in January and February.
Right.
Exactly opposite.
I mean, especially for people who love to talk about how they love science, you would think, right? Because even a lay person as myself knew that was a crazy idea.
Totally.
And so I was very surprised when my opponent congratulated Dr. Levine on steering us and doing such a wonderful job in steering us through COVID-19. And this county alone, 93% of all of our deaths as it relates to COVID took place in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. Very astounding, right?
And it's exactly matching what I would have predicted and exactly matching the science. And it confirms what I was saying earlier. I don't think the right thing necessarily to do is to shut down the community. The right thing to do is to sequester your vulnerable people, protect them, and then let everybody else go on with their normal life, but encourage them to be careful and good, drive carefully and use good hygiene. And then COVID is aggressive and contagious. It'll eventually work its way around and it'll pick out all the easy paths. Okay, let it do that. But then all the easy paths are gone and you've protected your vulnerable people and then things can open up again. That would be to me a smarter strategy than putting your most vulnerable people all together so they can all get sick. That doesn't make sense to me.
In addition to forcing businesses to close permanently.
Yeah, I don't get that
really
either.
Crazy.
I don't get that. I think that's immoral.
You know what? Let me tell you, I have gone on record saying multiple times, not only were those particular people in nursing home facilities trapped in those facilities, I believe there's a reason to believe that they were targeted. It is astounding that anyone with half a brain would mandate, while at the same time taking the secretary's mother out of a long-term care facility for safety, while mandating that others be placed into those facilities. So I am hopeful that instead of my opponent congratulating Dr. Levin for a job well done that someone, myself in particular, would call for an investigation of Dr. Levin and Governor Wolf. One more question: do you
Sure.
think we should have a vaccine for COVID?
Oh boy, vaccines are tricky things. Think about the flu shot. Every year, what they do is they go over to China and they find the four most likely flus to get here. And they come up with a shot that generates antibodies for those four flus, and then they give shots to everybody. And if they're lucky, they get one of the four. And if they're lucky, maybe 20, 30% of the population will have immunity from the vaccination. And so even if they did have a vaccine, it wouldn't necessarily be very effective because there's lots of things going on. One of the things that's going on is viruses are not static. They mutate. They change over time. So just about the time you have it figured out, it might change into something new. I mean, that's why you catch a new cold every year. It's called a retrovirus. Every year you can catch a new flu, or every year you can catch a new cold and flu because they change. They're not static. So the first thing is that it's a moving target you're trying to make a vaccine for. Second of all, it's hard to make vaccines. Even with our latest really whiz-bang techniques, it takes a lot of time. Then after you've got likely candidates for your vaccines, you've got to do clinical trials on them because there are all kinds of issues. You don't want to just start giving everybody shots of something you haven't tested. You kill a bunch of people. There are long-term effects. You can't just do that. Then once you've got through your clinical trials and you think you know which one you want to do, then you got to find a way to manufacture it and to get it distributed. And then you got to get people to be willing to let you stick a needle in their arm. And there are many things between now and a vaccine that just basically make it impractical to have a really good vaccine. I would say the soonest we would have any kind of practical effect from a vaccine would be a year from now.
Are you concerned by the warp speed in which we are manufacturing or moving a vaccine through the channels you just spoke about?
I'm not concerned as long as they have good controls. The thing that's spooky is it's kind of like the testing thing. The current tests that we're using, I think they only just got FDA approval like a week ago. They got emergency approval at first to be used in an emergency. But if you think about it, sticking a swab up your nose is not, it's not going to kill a lot of people. So it's not too dangerous. So it's easy to say, okay, we're going to let that one get through our FDA filter and let it go into use. It's easier to do that. But sticking a needle in somebody's arm and pumping something into their veins that hasn't been thoroughly tested, even the simplest, I teach my students that aspirin wouldn't pass the FDA today because enough people have bad reactions to aspirin that it wouldn't pass. So that's vaccines have the same problem. We're going to have a lot of casualties if we rush the vaccine. So I would be concerned if widespread use of it without clinical trials.
If one came out today, would you take it?
Nope. Do you know how we get around that in America? You know how we tested our AIDS vaccines? We would go over to villages in Africa where we knew there was a high prevalence of AIDS, and we would offer those people medical care if they would let us do the experiments with them. That's how we got around it. We can't do it in America because we're too litigious of a society. You have to do a controlled test. You have to have placebos, and you have to have rigorous controls and sampling, and to do it right and safely, you have to do that. And I just don't think you can just imagine the lawsuits going on for years afterwards.
Just a rapid fire yes or no, looking at your data for PA, should we be opening schools?
Oh yeah, you should. All of our schools should be open. That's the safest place in the country. Young people? Are you kidding?
But what about the teachers who are teaching them?
Well, what about the grocery store clerks and the gas station operators and the bank tellers and everybody else? Everybody's at risk. Why would we?
But they seem to be more special. But they seem to be more special.
No, and if you ask me, they're more essential than. And
I'm not
putting anybody down. Exactly. I don't want to put anybody down. But our children are our future. Our children should be one of our highest priorities. And we're depriving them of their social development. We're traumatizing them. We're taking them away from their peers. They need each other. Our kids are, there's going to be permanent emotional damage from this from our kids. We need them to get back to normal as soon as possible. You know, and I'm a teacher, and I'm looking forward to getting back with my kids in September or August. It'll actually a few weeks now. I'm really looking forward to getting back with them.
If you do not
We
have
have, and
symptoms,
we have a 2-second rule at our school. We get to hug each other at our school. But 2 seconds. So maybe we'll get that
if
this
you
year.
believe you may be asymptomatic, you don't have any symptoms, would you
Yeah.
suggest people get tested?
No.
Okay.
If you unless you think you're pregnant, don't get a test.
Okay.
That's why I use that analogy.
Last thing, I just want to open it up to you. I know we have to go. We ran over a little bit. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, this is such a, you know, I mean, this is just hard. Arthi said, I missed the beginning. Did they compare this to swine flu?
Yeah, you can do that. There's all kinds of problems with comparing it. You know, I keep trying to help people on the webpage know the difference between a correlation and a causation. You know, in order to make really rigorous comparisons, you got to have really rigorous controls. So I would be careful making too much comparison. One of the things that people are doing is comparing what they call excess deaths. They're saying, okay, well, are we having any more deaths this year than we normally have? And it's not much more. It's pretty normal for us, for example, to have 50,000 deaths from the flu in a normal year. Pretty normal. And sometimes more, sometimes 60, 70, 80,000. So we're in that ballpark. I think personally that the numbers that are being reported are inflated by a factor of 2 to 3. Too many things are labeled as COVID that are not COVID anymore. But that's my opinion. And the data seem to bear that out. And one of the ways I know is, for example, you ran into it in Pennsylvania, right? The state started declaring a bunch of cases being COVID, and all the morgue people said, all the coroners said, no, that's not right. But other states haven't had their coroners and morgues pushing back, and so those cases are surviving in other states. And it's interesting because since I was graphing and tracking the data, I noticed immediately when the CDC opened up the definitions that it doubled, sometimes tripled the number of deaths that were reported. And it had nothing to do with more actual cases. It had to do with labeling them as COVID I like to describe it as people that are in the hospital because of COVID or people are in the hospital with COVID. It's different. You know,
you know what, Barbara Sparhawk, she makes a good point. If any teacher is immunocompromised, pre-existing conditions, or living with those who are or is pregnant, they need to be protected. And that's what we've been saying all along.
Yeah.
That's what we've been saying all along.
Sure.
Back to back. But that's what we've been saying all along, is that this virus is a very serious virus. No one is undermining or making light of the severity of this virus, specifically towards those who have a compromised immune system, whatever the reasons may be. This virus has proven to be, as Dr. Frank has said, a match to Tinder. And we need to be very mindful and protective of that segment of our population. But that segment of our population is not the majority of our population. And so we need to be looking at data, as Dr. Frank said, and we wanted to use his moniker, don't fear, follow the data, people.
Yes.
Data is important. And not only can it save our lives, but it can save our businesses. And so, Dr. Frank, I give you the last word. Is there anything you think we should be aware of? Or a question I didn't ask you, but I should have.
Well, we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot on the page, so it's hard to cover it all. But I think we've done pretty well. I think we hit the major things. We were on the teacher subject there. And I'm not telling teachers who are immunocompromised to go teach. Although that's probably the safer place for them. I mean, if they're going to have a job, that might be a safer place than the grocery store. So if they think it's too risky for them, I understand, then they should find another career. But I wouldn't say that just about teachers. I would say that about any career. If it's too risky for you to be a grocery store clerk, don't be a grocery store clerk. If it's too dangerous for you to be a chef, don't be a chef. Everybody needs to make their individual choices, what's the safest for them. And, you know, kids are young and healthy, And that's probably a safer place to be if you're going to work with people. That's probably a safer place to be than a lot of places. So
Dr.
maybe that's
Frank, you
an answer
are
to
the
that of the
best.
question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frank. I appreciate you. Listen, can I have you back on?
Oh, anytime. If you want an update or something like that, I'd love to come back.
Yeah. Hey, listen, do you travel?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk. I have some thoughts because this is not going to go away. I earnestly believe it is the hashtag Me Too movement for the Democrats. They can't do hashtag Me Too because Biden has Tara Reid, but they're coming up with their own version to get people to the polls, and I believe this is just one of them.
Wow.
And so, and it's going to, I mean, we're seeing that our leaders, quote unquote, are politicizing this issue. We're not getting great data. And go to my website, you will see Governor Wolf's snarky smirk when
Wow.
he said, yeah, I have the data. I'm not going to show it to you. I'm not going to
Yeah.
give it to you. What you going to do about it?
I've talked
Basically, what are you
about
going
that
to
on
do
the
about it?
page. I've talked about that on the page. I prefer the positive approach where I say, look, folks, we have this really nasty situation. A lot of people are going to die no matter what we do. Let's see if we can minimize that. Let's work together. Here are the best data that I have available. I know every death in every county and every street. So here's where we got to watch. Let's work together as a team and let's lick this together. That's my preferred approach. It's ivory tower, it's idealistic, it's optimistic, but I really think that's what we should be trying for. We should try to be really transparent. And you can tell the states that are trying to do that, and some states are not. And unfortunately for you, you're one of the states where they're not very transparent.
Dr. Frank, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to meet you too.
Yes, likewise. I will be in contact with you. Thank you so much. Guys, to the rest of you, you know how we do this. Share this video. So many people, specifically in our district, we need to be informed. All across our nation, we need to be informed. But specifically in District 4, I love this area. I want to see businesses thrive. I want to see us make the best decision we possibly can with the best data that is available. We are not stupid people. That is one of the most remarkable things about the American spirit. We pivot, we innovate, we take in new information, and we do better. We're a nation that is constantly progressing forward. But what we have here, Dr. Levin and Governor Wolf are not my God. I do not need them to insulate me with bubble wrap and watch out for my every step. What we need is good information and allow us to be able to make the best decision. We did it. You and I mitigated the spread of COVID. Dr. Levin and Governor Wolf did not. I don't believe that they could fight their way out of a wet paper bag. Look at what they've done to nursing homes. That's how brilliant they are. A 93% death rate in our nursing homes as it relates to COVID-19, just in Montgomery County alone. These people are about as smart as a box of rocks, and that's not saying much. We need to stand up. I would not be losing my business because of these draconian measures. And yes, I just said that. We can do better. I need you to help get me elected. Please go to Kathy Barnett forcongress.com. Kathy Barnett forcongress.com. If you want better leadership, this is your chance. I believe I am your best chance at ever getting anyone in office who will actually work for you. I am not a political social climber as my opponent is. I believe in term limits. I've limited myself to 2 years or 2 terms. Uh, um, 2 terms in Congress. That's all I want. I just want to do my part in getting and writing this ship called America and making sure we have something to hand down to the next generation. If you believe that, if you want that, if you know something is awry with our leaders and what it is that they're telling us, please go to Kathy Barnett forcongress.com and donate now. I cannot do this without you. I need you. Okay? We need each other. Blessings. Take care of each other. be safe.